Okay, so before starting this first episode of the Ask JNA series, just want to apologize to you because a lot of you have been asking me what happened to the Mindset Monday and the Winning Wednesdays last week. So after the news of the lockdown that came out on Tuesday, what happened was that we actually restructured our content a little bit so that we can value add to you all even more. So this week on, you're going to hear not only the Mindset Mondays, the Winning Wednesdays, the JNA Unlock series, you're also going to have the Ask JNA show and also the JNA Sales series, okay? So to answer some of the question as to what the Ask JNA show is about, the Ask JNA show is just for maybe you are beginners or first time or even second time property buyers who just want to ask us some questions, okay, and I just want to answer all of them, okay? Okay, so in today's episode of the Ask JNA show, I'm going to answer one of the questions from our followers, which is, what are the different types of properties there are in Singapore? Okay, so there are three main types of properties in Singapore. You have the residential ones, you have the industrial ones, and you also have the commercial ones. Okay, so in each segment, there are actually subsections as well. So under the residential property section, we have firstly public housing, which is your HDB. Secondly, private and public hybrid housing, which is your executive condominiums. You hear ECs here and there, these are your executive condominiums. Thirdly, your private housings, and lastly, you have your landed housing, okay? And in your commercial market, you have different kinds of properties as well. You have the commercial shop houses, you have the HDB shop houses, you have your retail shops, and you also have your medical suites. And lastly, for the industrial segment in the market, you have the B1 light industrial, you have the B2, which are the heavy industrial, and thirdly, you have flatted offices. So let me go into the residential market first, okay? So in the residential market, you have your HDB, which is a public housing, and something to take note of the HDB market is that you have to wait for the MOP period, which means it's the minimum occupancy period. It starts from the day your unit receives the TOP and 5 years from there. So you cannot sell your HDB, you cannot buy another property for investment during this 5 years MOP period, okay? You cannot buy any residential property throughout this period. But yes, you can go and buy commercial properties or you can even buy industrial properties, okay? Next is the private and public hybrid housing. So the private and public hybrid housings are your executive condominiums. So your executive condominiums are a little bit more funny because executive condominiums actually has to fulfill the HDB MOP period, and only after 10 years, then it will reach the full privatization of your unit. And for the first 5 years after achieving your MOP, after completing your MOP period, this is when you can sell to Singapore citizens or PRs, but only after 10 years, then it becomes a fully privatized condominium and you can sell to foreigners, okay? And in the private housing market, we have the private condominiums, okay? Private condominiums do not have the MOP period. We have this thing called the SSD, the seller stamp duty, which means that after purchasing your private property, upon the exercise date, right, you have to count 3 years. So after 3 years, then you don't have to pay taxes to the government. If you were to sell the private property 1 year after exercise date, okay, within 1 year, you have to pay 12%. Within the second year, you have to pay 8%. And if you haven't reached the third year, you have to pay 4%. So please do take note. Don't just buy a private property and just sell it. Always check back with your real estate consultant to make sure that your SSD period is over, okay? Lastly, we have the landed housing. The landed housing, you have different kinds of housing. Firstly, you have your bungalows, the big ones. Secondly, you have your semi-detached, so it's like two bungalows separate into one bungalow separate into two. You have your inter-terraces, your corner terraces, you have your cluster houses, your townhouses, okay? The difference between cluster house and townhouse is that usually you have the strata title, which means that you don't really own the land, you have an MCSD that take care of the entire place. If you're interested in buying a unit for rebuilding, okay, you have to consider those with a land title, which means your bungalows, your semi-Ds, or even your inter-terrace. I'll go into the in-depth of this kind of properties later on, but now I'll just give you a brief summary, okay, so I don't bore you. Okay, secondly, we go into the commercial properties. Okay, commercial properties, as I mentioned, you have your shop houses, you have your conserved shop house, there's primary conserved shop house, there's secondary conserved shop house, and even shop houses, there are different kinds, right? There's 99 years, there are freehold, there are 999 years as well, okay? You also do have your HDB shop houses, you have your medical suites, and you also have your retail shops, okay? Commercial properties are perfect if you are looking for investment property that doesn't have ABSD, you don't have to pay the additional buyer stamp duty, you don't have to pay the SSD. Whereas in the residential property market, if you want to buy a second property, you have to pay for ABSD. If you are a foreigner, you also have to pay for ABSD in the residential market. In the commercial market, there are no ABSD, there's also no SSD. So it's actually a favorite for a lot of foreigners. Okay? Third, you have your industrial properties. Okay, industrial properties are those kind of factories that you see outside, the warehouses, and these kind of properties are a little bit more unique because in terms of rental yield, they have one of the highest amongst the three. Okay, but for industrial properties, even though there aren't any additional buyer stamp duty, there's actually seller stamp duty. So you have to take note of that, which means that if you were to sell your SSD within the first 3 years, you have to pay the seller stamp duty, which means the taxes to the government. Okay, so after watching this video, you already know the main segments in the Singapore's real estate market, you know the different subsections as well. So if you have any friends who don't know anything about Singapore real estate market, this is the perfect video for beginners. At least you know what kind of properties there are in Singapore. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Ask JNA Show. Keep the comments coming, keep the questions coming, give us a like, give us some comments, or just share these videos with your friend. Thank you so much.